Souls games are on the rise, careful and methodical games with intense and engaging combat. We wanted our combat where the player will be forced to show restraint and control. By the end, the player must understand all the mechanics of the game to succeed in these fights. In addition, we wanted the map to be fully explorable, and not just an area for the player to run around in. We wanted the player to pick a playstyle between lethal or latent. To incorporate these elements, we looked at the different From Software titles that pioneered this genre and their adjacent games. The games that we analyzed included, but are not limited to, Dark Souls 1, 2, 3, Demon Souls, Elden Ring, Bloodborne, Sekiro, Thymesia, Lords of the Fallen, Kanagi Usagi, Armored Core 6, Lies of P, and several more. We wanted to combine different elements from all the games to create a unique experience. From the Asian-inspired world of Sekiro to the grand scale of killing gods to games like Elden Ring and Black Myth Wukong, we wanted players to rise from their deaths to become better than their past selves in emergence from the grave. Like all the games we looked at, exploration is a vital and important part of the game we wanted to make, with intricate and complex lore. With this, we had a couple problems. We did not have the time to really cook up an entirely complex world as detailed and intricate like Elden Ring, Bloodborne, or Dark Souls. And instead of using a world that one of our developers had already created and published, we decided to make our own to fit the unique and specific story we wanted to tell with our game. Our story goes as follows. There was a massive war from the old gods, and thousands of years later, in a crater created from their war, there was a village built, and a soldier, which later becomes the playable character, from one of the gods' army, was buried there and lost their memory due to some kind of curse. To determine what happened to themselves, they must take the memories of the people that live in the village by killing them and extracting their memories. This dark fantasy setting allows us to tell a compelling narrative with an immersive world and dictate the rules of the gameplay and open world. As all inspirational games have a distinct art style, we too needed one. We consulted the artist to determine the best way we could design things like the user interface and different assets. As we only had one artist, we found an asset pack from fab.com and decided to use that for the environment. This asset pack was called Sika Dynasty, found during the free month that Epic Games was having. Our artist saw that there were particular models that needed to be created in the UI elements as well, and so for that, we decided to go onto the UI. For the UI, we went with a paintbrush, as it resembled the most to East Asian culture. This was where the designers and the artists collaborated to make a health bar, stagger meter, item selection, and XP bar. Here, we have a very simple rendition of the world and its environments. We implemented a simple falling leaves VFX to give the feeling of the fall season. Here we have a small shopkeeper and a small platform in case there was something important here, like floor markers or even simple loot. We can also use this area to grapple around, and using this grapple, we can also see different parts of the environment, as long as with the water that's surrounding this area. In practice, the UI looks as follows. In this clip, we can see several factors. There are assets here to resemble the houses and trees to provide atmosphere. The water here softly glows to resemble magical waters that run through the village. The water here acts as a barrier and the character cannot swim. The water seems to exist in the crater, creating a motif of stagnation and regression of society, not just the water. This ties beautifully to the story as inspired by eldritch horror tropes and Sekiro's own story. In addition to this, there are other several factors to look at in terms of gameplay. Within the gameplay, there is currently one enemy type. Here, this enemy does certain combat actions. The combat was done through weapon traces instead of collision. This was intentional to work and refine the future parry system. Within the parry system, the combat flowchart is as follows, with a simple Boolean deciding factor of what is happening. This is a technical design for the designers and for the programmers to work with when they combine their intellect together to create the most perfect combat system in this game. There are also three main elements in the game: health, stagger meter, and the XP system. The XP system works as any of the other Souls games, where it is the currency to the shop. Just like the XP, it will be lost upon death, and will have a chance to be recovered afterwards. This is one of the most important parts of the game, as it determines risks and how the player should approach the situation and whether or not combat is worth it. The stagger meter, like Sekiro, increases upon parrying and being parried through different numbers and allows the player to increase their chances at staggering an enemy to perform a fatal attack. The biggest part that can go wrong here is a stagger meter not communicating and performing properly. However, through several tests and working through bugs, this is a fixable issue. Another potential issue that we had was actually figuring out what the stamina or stagger meter was initially for. You see, in games like Elden Ring, especially in Shadow of the Erdtree, certain bosses' combos would never end because they never had a stagger meter or a stamina meter like the player does. So while the boss can continue their chain of attacks infinitely, the player cannot. This is in its own right a way to increase the stakes of combat. However, we wanted this to be more engaging and more realistic, so we added the same stats the player has to the enemies as well. So when the player has a stagger or a stamina meter, so does the enemies. And lastly is the health. Health is the most vital part of the entire combat system. The player will lose health in combat and gain health in taking the recovery flask dubbed Elixir of Memory or Liquid Memory. As the player does not take fall damage, environmental damage is something we plan to implement, things like fire damage or just simply water. In the game, we decided to implement the game animation sample made by Epic Games, or GAS. This would allow us to use motion matching for a smoother traversal feel. Within the assets already created, the most vital part would be to use the level design blocks to create parts that can be used for parkour. However, the most important part of the entire system is actually the grappling system. The grappling system is meant to not only resemble Sekiro's grappling system, but also to give an element of speed and verticality to the player. As exploration is a main pillar of our gameplay, adding unique interactions for the player will allow them to properly want to explore and find new and better solutions to the game. This can include anything from shortcuts, which the From Software games are extremely well known for using, to something just like escaping enemies. The grappling system is extremely versatile and can be used wherever the player wishes, whenever the player wishes. The potential issue in this regard, however, is that the game animation sample itself is extremely smooth. The most important part for us is to make sure that our grappling system is just as smooth as well. While we have two somewhat working grappling systems, it is important that we take one and really refine it to make sure that it works. One of them is a collision-based one, while the other one works on blueprints and widgets. These two systems are inherently different, however they do take the same effective meaning of what the grappling system is supposed to be and tries to emulate it in the most perfect way possible to make the game as smooth as possible. Of course, there are no actual character models yet, so for us, our first and most foremost part would be to find good character models, especially characters that are rigged for the UE5 skeleton, as that is what the motion matching and that is what the grappling system animations are currently using. For this, what we could do is use the Paragon assets that are used and given by Epic Games. However, these have their own animations and their own animation blueprints with them. So while we could just retarget animations, it might not look the smoothest. Rather, what we should do is try to get unique made characters either off of fab.com, Sketchfab, or some other website as such. In addition to this, we also have the potential for using more gravestones. Here, the gravestones themselves are like the bonfires in Dark Souls. However, while the gravestones are there is no actual interaction happening. Rather, you just respawn at the gravestone. Again, the mechanic works, however, it is still a lot of refinement and meant to be done. In addition to all this, there is a lot for the comps for the future boss fights. Our current comp is Sekiro, well, Sword Saint Ishin from Sekiro. You see, Sword Saint Ishin not only uses a sword, but a spear and a gun too. This increases A, stakes, and B, the pacing of the combat. While the combat itself is pretty careful and slow and methodical, unlike Genichiro's boss fight, Sword Saint Ishin takes everything the player learns and really tries to force the player to use it all in this fight. And that is a point that we are trying to also make within our game. And hence, we are trying to create the most perfect relationship between not just the gameplay and combat, but with the feel of the gameplay and combat. For now, our game is very close to being feature complete. Our programmers have been working nearly round the clock to get to where we are, and there are even more things not seen in this demonstration, from our grappling system that is yet to be truly implemented to our finalized parry system and stamina meters. There is so much more to come in the next time we emerge from the grave.